start with a wide shot to show that a lot more people came out this time.
Woo! Woo! Excited.
Alright, so I'm assuming you guys are here because you're at least somewhat interested in video games. So out of curiosity, like how many of you are super anxious about your job prospects out of college?
Wait a minute.
Wait. So if you're like me, yeah, that rings pretty true. And like we have a lot of options here in the CS department. We have our InfoSec major, we have our web development major, and then we have like our machine learning engineer majors. And those are all great tracks, and I'm pretty sure we're also adding a video game development major. I'm pretty sure, I heard some rumors. But from what I've gathered, that might not be the best career trajectory for you, and I'm not saying that that's what you want to do with your life, and there's no convincing you that I'm going to do anything to recommend that, but hopefully I can at least give you some information to arm you and maybe change your mind. So we're going to talk about how games workers aren't generally protected by a union, that the game industry kind of chews up young talent and produces half-serviceable games out the other end, and that video games are now being censored by China, which is now the largest video game market on the planet. So, career fair. Working conditions, right? So, anyone following the industry knows that things are currently pretty bad. So, Priscilla Martins, who is a Bangladesh Australia developer out in Austria, outlines the pros and cons of the industry in her MASH blog, and she says that there are very high layoff rates in the industry. So the general cycle is that development for a video game will start from a publisher. Then as development continues and deadlines start getting closer and closer, then crunch initiates because there are pre-order bonuses, DLCs, all that fun stuff that they have to get out of the way, shipped out the door. Then the game releases, usually to lackluster fanfare despite the massive amount of hype. Then it doesn't sell as well, the companies start laying off people, and the cycle repeats, hiring new developers. And this also produces a situation where the people that are employees for the company don't actually qualify for benefits because they were brought on last minute. Training is usually also very on the fly, so you're not actually sat down and trained properly, which is why the products are so lackluster. And also, you can probably ask your hiring manager when you'll be laid off because they'll probably know if you're being brought onto the team. So crunch is kind of like the cycle of early development, and then as deadlines approach, you're forced to work longer and longer hours. And what's sad about it is you're not even forced to do so. It's a workplace culture that the video game industry has built up over all these years. So employees, they're pressured to work longer hours, and then that's all products releases, the lackluster fanfare. And this all started with something called the spouse letters, which were two letters that basically blew the whistle on the bad working conditions of the video game industry. The first one was out of EA, and then the follow-up was from Rockstar, and these were in like 2004 and 2010. And then Business Insider's Ben Gilbert outlined all of this, and the people at BioWare, after this, after the stress burst came out, then in 2012, I think it was, BioWare, it started coming out that employees were actually being let go or forced to take sick leave because they were so stressed, and they called them stress casualties. And so all of these malpractices are kind of being fixed, but there's no real good solution as of yet. There is an alliance called Game Workers Unite, and this is basically an organization that's trying to unionize the game industry. They're not a union in themselves, but I think this is a good step towards progress, but the way things are now, there aren't any real strong industries, and video games are kind of an outlier in that there is no union like TV or movies. So the turnover is usually pretty extreme in video games. Some of these games might be a little familiar to you, and what they all have in common is they all have incredibly rocky launches. So just going down the line, Mass Effect Andromeda, Destiny 2, Titanfall 2, Fallout 76, you all know how that one went, Battlefront 2, Final Fantasy 14, which got better over time, No Man's Sky, and then after this was Aliens Colonial Marines, which is actually a very old release, but it's probably the most notorious or first incident of hype culture being let down extraordinarily well. Monster Hunter World again got better. Watch Dogs and even Warframe had a kind of rocky start, but some of these games, like the Warframes or Final Fantasies, they did eventually build up a nice business model, but it took a lot of hard work, a lot of years of hard labor at TLC, and even then, some of these games are still a little shaky. So, also, as well as like producing subprime products, a lot of video game studios get closed. So I thought like a narrow slice of like 2017 would be the best way to like describe this. So studios like Visceral, which made Dead Space, Montega, which made Gigantic, which was a great game that just doesn't exist anymore, Runic, which made Torchlight and Hog, Gazillion Entertainment, which made Marvel Heroes, BJS MVA, which made Drawn to Death, which was a great game for the PS4, Bosky, which made Lawbreakers and Radical Heights, rest in peace, Wargaming Seattle, Capcom Vancouver, and last but not least, Telltale, which notoriously let all of its employees off without severance. So, and the reason for almost all of these practices is simply because most of these companies are publicly held. So these are all companies, this is all from Newzoo, which is a great industry reporting site that gathers statistics on the video game industry and releases annual reports. And as you can see, a lot of these familiar companies are owned by shareholders, so as such, they have an incentive to make as much profit for their shareholders as possible. And then that kind of brings us into some more of the greed. So, because the US is now on equal footing with China, video game companies are now a little more incentivized to create Chinese versions of games or to straight out format their game to fit the regulations of China. And with the whole China ordeal, I know it's kind of a big topic on both sides and this might get a little political, but in general, this you can see is the statistics for the video game industry. So you can see that the revenues for America and China are neck and neck right now, and we've been going back and forth over the course of this year. So, for the history of this, we had started off with Richard Nixon in 1972. And this is according to PBS's American Experience in 2000. He went over to China, he visited Mao, and he started opening up relationships with the country. Then from there, they started developing local competitors. So we have companies like Tencent, NetEase, and Wahoo? It's the Chinese version of Twitter. And so as these corporations started to develop, they always tended to mirror American counterparts. So you have this own little ecosphere developing in China. And so as a part of that, the Chinese government, later on down the line in 2000, they started banning video game consoles and arcade cabinets. So as a result, the Chinese web cafe scene really blew up, and since then PC has been a major player in the Chinese market. And the thing about China is they are very notoriously good at getting around China's Great Firewall, which is the government's solution to the internet. So China has its own isolated internet, and as such, they try to block as much foreign influence as possible. But China has found a lot of workarounds in the way of like VPN. Steam, for example, is actually unfiltered in China. So you can actually download video games uncensored, straight from Steam. And this has kind of created like a subculture too, where Chinese people use a lot of analogies and symbolisms to actually express their true pain. And so because of these social networks, they're starting to get a little freer. But when it comes to producing video games, they are still held under the regulatory industries of two major ones. So there is the Ministry of Culture initially, which was the company that says there can be no gore, or the organization that says there can be no gore, there can be no skeletons, there can be no undead things, anything that goes against the Chinese way of life, which are outlined right here. Then there was the SAPPRFT, which was the ones that actually gave the seal of approval. And these two industries actually fought over the Chinese version of WoW, and eventually they condensed into SAPP, which is the modern day regulator. And they still follow many of these rules. And basically, if you want to get a game in China, you have to get a sponsor, so you have to get someone to license your game to, which was the example of NetEase and Blizzard. So WoW is actually sent out to the Chinese market via NetEase, but Blizzard is the company producing it. And if all that being said, The influence of China has been growing steadily over the course of the years. So it's a little hard to work around their strict limitations and still produce a good game that actually matches the developer's original intentions. So in conclusion, I don't think all hope is lost for game developers. Unionization is on the horizon, which is a good thing, and we do have a nice career center on campus. So if I did somehow manage to convince you guys to give other careers a look, they're an excellent resource. I especially suggest Laura Albom because she is fantastic. She is our STEM coordinator, and if you are like a freshman or a sophomore, still go see her because it's important to be looking at what you want to do when you get out of college. Because hey, there might be a really nice job waiting for you that someone else might find boring, but will make you a lot of money so you can play the games that you want to play. So in summation, just because you like sausages doesn't mean you should necessarily go work at a sausage factory.